Raise your hand though, we do have a couple folks who are wandering around with wireless microphones. And that was the comment I received, is folks would just like to be able to hear all the questions and comments that are being raised. So Cheryl O'Brien, who you all know, who I've been told walks on water amongst many of you, she's in the back and she'll be providing that microphone. So excellent. So part 3 is the second appraisal process. And I know a lot of folks have questions about this appraisal and some of the values maybe that have been developed. Well, CUFA is very explicit that the second appraisal process is that time to develop sort of a counter argument or a counter proposal for the value of that lot. So this section is going to be, I think, really useful. We've already had a number of folks indicate they would like to obtain a second appraisal. And so Kim's going to walk us through that process now.
As CUFA provided us direction on how to appraise properties, come up with market value and fees, they also provided a second appraisal process. So it's like Jonathan said, kind of a counter to what the agency came up with, and that's in section 610 of CUFA. And basically what it is when you guys received your letters of notification of the agency appraisal and what your resulting fee would be, there was also language in that letter that said if you wish to secure your right to possibly get a second appraisal, please let us, Forrest, know within 60 days of receipt of that letter. And as you recall, for those of you who are with me out on the lot inspections, I encouraged you to do that. Just to secure your right, flood these guys with your request saying you may want to wish to get a second appraisal. Does it mean that I'm holding you to it? As after you go through things, you think about stuff, maybe you talk to your tract and you've decided not to do that? You don't have to, but I want to make sure you've secured your right to do so. I also encourage you, and I know this is what part of this meeting is to also go through the appraisal to see if there's actually any facts that we made a mistake on. I mean, we're doing a lot of these out there, and there's chances are we're human, that maybe we made an error. Let's say a common one I found that we have made an error in the past, especially where we have a lot of tracts, typicals, and permit holders, is maybe we called an access road paved when it was supposed to be dirt, or something along that line. So there's actually a fact that's incorrect. Please let us know. I don't expect you to go get a second appraisal for a fact that's incorrect, or we got something incorrect off of the inventory sheet. Because in doing the second appraisal, that second appraiser that is hired is getting the exact same instructions to the letter that the agency appraiser received. The exact same inventory sheets with those exact same facts that are on there. The same typical lots. The same amount of acreage that's located on your face page of the permit. Everything's going to be exactly the same. The exact same date of value, that date in August 2010 will be that second appraiser's date of value. So if there is a fact that's incorrect, that maybe we lifted it off of the inventory sheet incorrectly, or possibly I made a mistake in my review when I was reviewing something, that happens. I've done 550 of these reviews that I've had to write, so there's chances are a time or two I've made an error on something. And so maybe it was in...
When you get an extension on the 60 days?
No.
Well, how are we supposed to get somebody in to close the
Okay,
road?
as I said, notice of intent. I did not say you had to have the appraisal done within 60 days. I said you have to let us know you may wish to secure your right to get a second appraisal. You have 1 year from your date of notice. And your notice date was?
January 24th.
So you have until January 23rd of 2015 to get in that second appraisal report.
How do we do that?
Okay, I'm going to talk about that. So, once you, and I believe, yeah, you're still in your 60 days. So those folks that have not, if your tract has submitted overall a request to get a second appraisal, you're covered. If your tract president or tract rep said, we wish to get a second appraisal on typicals A, B, and C, he or she has covered that for your tract. If they haven't, and it makes you feel better to submit your own, that's fine. But if you're, yes?
The law requires that the permittee make that request.
Right, exactly. I know it does, and we have had a lot of tract presidents, because we have some tracts in other forests that have 300 and some odd permit holders. So we have if the tract president says, I am representing, and it's not just someone you know, that day voted on to represent your tract. Your official tract president said, look, I am representing my constituency to get appraisals done on A, B, and C typical, or some of them just say on just one typical lot. If we get other requests in that covers them all, fine. I mean, we will accept it, okay? We're trying to make that part easy.
But you appoint the appraiser, right?
No, I don't appoint it, I approve the appraiser. So let me back up a little bit here. So, once you get your request into the forest, there is what we call a second appraisal information package that is mailed to everyone that has asked for a second appraisal. In there is a cover letter that kind of gives the gist of the process, okay? There is also a set of the contract specifications that are to be used. On the back page, there's what they call an appraisal assignment agreement. It's the same agreement that the agency appraiser had to sign, taking on that assignment, that he or she knows what they're getting themselves into. We also provide a list of appraisers that have done successful work for the Forest Service in the past. It's just a place for you to start contacting. Do you have to use those appraisers? No, you don't. However, if you want to hire someone else that's not on their list, I need to approve it. One, and it's not so I have any undue influence on that appraiser. That's not why we're doing this. One, we've got to make sure that that appraiser has the right kind of appraisal license to do the assignment. They've had the required federal appraisal class in order to do the assignment, and that they are familiar with properties in rural areas, okay? And I have approved other appraisers that wasn't initially on our kind of go-to list. And then I've had some I've had to turn away because all they've had is residential licenses, and all they know how to do is residential appraisals, you know, in the big city. And that it's a completely different assignment. They've never taken what we call the yellow book class. It's how to do federal appraisals, in which these appraisals are held to that standard. So those are just mandatory things. I just want to make sure you're not wasting your money hiring someone. Yes.
I think the letter may have mentioned that they have to have experience with rec residences. Is that not, that you're not going to hold people to that?
No.
If they're like an MAI, that's okay?
No.
Okay.
My biggest thing is to make sure they have a state of California general license. If they're not in the state of California, they have to get a temporary practice license in the state of California. They've had to have the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisition Appraisal class. Okay? They have to have experience working with remote, rural, mountain properties. We have a lot of folks that meet those first two, and all they have done is either residential or commercial work in the big city, okay? To me, that's not showing any experience in order to give you a credible work product to turn in, okay? So if I haven't used an appraiser before, and you're asking me, Kim, will you approve Joe Blow? I will call Joe Blow and talk to him and ask him to send, and if I'm not familiar with him at all, I will ask him or her to send me in a sample work product of a similar type scenario property and go through it. And like I said, I have approved other appraisers in the past.
So on the appraisal, the second appraisal and the parameters, does the appraiser have to use the same comparables that were used?
No. Do not have to use the same comparables. They just have to stick to the exact same appraisal instructions that were given, the same typical lots, same data value.
But
Okay.
they still have to stay within they can't take into consideration that we only use the lot 6 months out of the year, and all of the other things that you've put in there that they can't.
Okay, no, they're still in those tight parameters, so they cannot take into account the permit restrictions. As far as access goes, if you are physically blocked from accessing your property when it snows for some reason, or the Forest Service locks a gate for a specific amount of time that you cannot drive through there, those things are considered, okay? But to come in and kind of make up a scenario or, take into account the permit restrictions or take into account this or that, no, they're restricted to the exact same appraisal instructions that were given and the same things that can be considered and not considered.
You said that this appraiser isn't going to use the same comparables.
They may or
They
may
don't
not.
have to.
Right.
But it was also mentioned that maybe it would be wise to see if anyone else in your comparable cabin scenario has gotten their second appraisal. That sort of contradicts itself.
No, I don't think you said that.
No, I think that the core of your question is if someone in your same typical lot grouping has already identified a contract appraisal, we would recommend, yes, the pooling of resources to lower your cost for that product is definitely something that should be desirable.
Right, I wouldn't expect to see 5 different appraisal reports coming in on the same typical lot because the 5 of you that were grouped under that typical all went off and got 5 separate appraisals. That I don't recommend at all. That's a waste of your money. That's why I was saying it's usually on these tracts, and I haven't seen it yet, they have gotten together with their fellow permit holders in the tract and said, we are going to, pool our resources. Let's see if we can hire this appraiser to do, let's say, all 3 typical lots in our tract, and we'll all chip in, $100 to get it done.
Do you have
Okay?
any idea what the cost is to have an appraisal of 3 typical lots?
It will cost anywhere, depends, who you use and stuff, so anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000, probably, somewhere in there. So they're not cheap. Forest Service got a little bit of a bulk discount because we had a whole bunch done at one time. But when you're going on these on a tract by tract kind of basis, they're spendy. They're narrative reports. They're not the form reports that you would have done on your house, let's say when you're applying to a refinance or for a home loan. They're a different appraisal beast, and they're a beast.
The question was, 3 typical lots, and you said $5,000 to $8,000. Do you mean $5,000 to $8,000 per typical lot?
It depends. Okay, and that's going to be my famous quote. It depends. Sometimes initially it'll be, let's say, $5,000 to do one, and maybe they do 3, it'll be maybe $8,000 because all of the work has been done up front on the one, and to do valuation on an extra 2, they have to do, of course, a little bit more work to it, and they have to do a separate analysis, but the big upfront work has already been done with that first lot, so to speak.
Do they kind of let you know what the cost will be up front?
They
Do
will
they tell
have
you?
to let you know what the cost is going to be up front. So this is what I'm going to recommend, is that before you go out and hire an appraiser, to just go off and get a second, please share with that person the agency provided appraisal, and that includes the addenda items where it's got the contract specifications and what things are they considered. So appraiser who is ethical should be able to go through there and say, I probably in my sales data, I know I may come in a little bit better than this, and you will be signing a contract with that appraiser up front, so you know exactly how much it's going to cost. There shouldn't be any surprises, and you work out, the billing if it's so much up front and so much when the product is completed. And I would advise you that maybe some of your payment is based on the Forest Service approving that report, okay? Because if I have any questions, I want to be able to go back to that appraiser and say, well, what did you mean by that? Just like I went back with our appraiser, okay? I just didn't rubber stamp something that came in from any of our agency contract appraisers region-wide. It was a back and forth on stuff until I was satisfied with the information that's on there, and I've probably done that almost in every single second appraisal. And I have approved almost every single one except for maybe 2 in this region.
I want to make sure that the microphone works. Hello? I
We
want
can
to
hear
make
you.
sure that we've got 40 minutes until lunch. I want to make sure Kim has the time she needs to cover her information. We also have started a bin list over here, so folks have been mentioning questions and concerns. If during the lunch break you want to add something up here to make sure we address it in the Q&A, that would be fine. In the meantime, if you could hold your questions to ensure Kim gets through, if you are finished with your presentation and it's before 12, we can start entertaining some of the questions. Otherwise, we will have the afternoon dedicated to that.
Okay. So I've got maybe about 5 or 6 minutes to go, and then we can go on to the question thing.
In this second appraisal, do we need to have all the fluff about where this?
Absolutely, that's in the contract specs. And to have it to be a full report that meets the standards of the general standards, which is USPAP, the Uniform Standards for Professional Appraisal Practices, and USPLA, Yellow Book, the Uniform Standards for Federal Appraisals. Yes, the fluff and stuff all needs to be in there to make it credible. Yes, so it will be.
Does it have to be the same for repeated patents or servitude?
Yes, it does. So it has to be the same typical lot and the same grouping. If you have a grouping issue, okay, that you feel that you are more closely identifiable with group B rather than group A that you're in, you need to take that up with the forest. However, we've been through this a lot, and we even changed groupings on the day of the lot visit just to ensure that they were correct. But like I said, I mean, stuff happens. So if you have an issue, that's when you have to get back with Jonathan on that. Okay, so on this second,
Yeah, let's give
Okay,
her 6 minutes of fame.
so on the second appraisal process, once you have hired, or you want to hire an appraiser, and let's say that appraiser's not on my list, you need to contact me, okay? And that's in that letter that you're going to get with your second appraisal package. So I can officially say, yes, your appraiser's blessed to go, okay? I will then issue instructions to that appraiser. It's going to be the same instructions that you're given in that appraisal package. I will make sure he or she signs that appraisal assignment agreement and goes on throughout the process. The appraiser will probably, and it kind of depends on the relationship that you have with your appraiser, he or she may finish that report and give it back to you so you can look at it, and then you submit it to me for review. Usually in the past, this is the way it's been going the last couple, 3 years, we've gotten them concurrently, okay? Again, that's up to you, because this may come in, and you may want to say, let's just say it comes in higher. You may not want to submit that to me for review or for us to consider, okay? So I would say that maybe you want to take a look at it first, okay? And then send it to me for review. When I do my review, I put on my blinders. I forget that this appraisal exists, okay? So I look at it based on the contract specs, based on if that appraiser did its due diligence in finding the market data, doing everything they're supposed to do according to all the standards that appraiser was given, okay? I may, like I said, come back and ask some questions. More often than not, the appraiser sends me some supplemental information. Have the values changed? Yes, sometimes they have, which hasn't made the permit holders too happy, to be honest. That once he or she came back with that supplemental information, they kind of went, oh, it's really not that value I thought it was going to be. It's a tad higher. Even maybe, I think, one time a little bit lower. But I just got to make sure my due diligence as a reviewer, and under which my license is predicated on, is that I have to make sure that it has met those specs and do a thorough review.
Before we hire an appraiser for a second appraisal, if we submit factual errors to you, how long does it take you to get back to us? And is there a money adjustment offered when it comes back to us?
Yeah, if it's a legitimate, that probably sounds worse than what it is, but for lack of a better word. If it's certainly an error, it's certainly something that has an effect on value, Sure, we'll come back. I'll probably go to the appraiser and just say, could you please give me an amendment to the appraisal report rather than me just amending it or supplementing it as a reviewer. I would rather have it amended into the report. I will then issue amended review. I will let the forest know, and then there will be a correction in what your fee will be. How long does it take? If I'm snowed with 50 of these at one time, it may take a little bit longer to do. But I try to turn them around in a couple of weeks, depending on how many hit my desk at the same time. Has that happened before? Yes. Have we changed the value? Yes. That has happened. Okay, real quick, so I want to finish my...
I've heard the terms exclusive use, personal enjoyment, and highest and best use. And in Title VI, it says that the lot means a parcel of land in which a cabin owner is authorized to build, use, occupy, maintain a cabin, and related improvements. And to use that very technically, as it's written, my personal use and exclusive use is about a 25 by 40 foot rectangle on a big piece of land. Everything else outside of that rectangle where my cabin sits is there for the enjoyment and use of 330 million people in these grand United States, plus any tourists coming into these borders. So why am I having to pay for all of that land if all I'm using is what my cabin is sitting on?
Right, okay, we're kind of going backwards a little bit, but why? Is because I said to determine your fee, it's a two-part process. One is to come up with a market value of the lot, so that's where we pretend that it is a private ownership lot, to come in with that market value.
It's not private. How can you say that?
Because, I know it's not private. I realize that. However, CUFA was very specific on how your fees were to be determined, okay? It was a two-part process. We come up with the market value of the lot with these parameters considered and not considered. Your fee then was another consideration. It was 5%. The thought was to compensate you for those private fee simple rights of ownership that you don't enjoy as a permit holder. That it was 5%. I don't know if 5% is fair, okay? It could be 2%, it could be 1%, 6%, I don't know. The thing is, it's in the legislation and I can't change it, and as of right now, I can't change the way the fee process is because no other legislation has passed to change it.
200 yards in front of my lot is a listed property for about 25% less than what you say my lot is worth, and it's private land. It's on the MLS, look it up.
Okay, I will, and if it was listed for that price in 2010, the date of value of the appraisal, then the second
It's not
appraiser
worth
should consider it.
30% more than that now.
Okay, so let me get through the process, okay? So once these appraisals, like I said, are completed, I will review them. There may be some back and forth between the appraiser and I. Then hopefully I will have a reviewed and approved appraisal report, okay? Hang on just a second, let me get through this. And so I will then let you know, okay, that I have hopefully reviewed and approved this for agency use. I will send a copy to the forest. What I will instruct you to do is to please contact the forest supervisor through a letter saying, I have been through the second appraisal process, it's been reviewed and approved for agency use. For a supervisor, I would like you to take this second appraisal into consideration when determining my fee. Okay? They have to have that request letter in order to consider this second appraisal. So what happens now? Nancy has 2 approved appraisal reports because I don't rescind the agency report if I approve a second appraisal, okay? So now Nancy's got 2 approved agency reports, and I'm assuming the one you submit is lower, okay? And I've approved a lower value for however, because that appraiser justified it so. So that means, and she's got to make a determination on fees, not on value, not on the validity so much of the appraisal, a little bit, but on fees. So her decision space is basically between the fee derived from the agency approved appraisal and the second appraisal. She can go anywhere from low to high to anywhere in between. Is she going to call up Kim Brower and ask for some advice? Probably. That's when I step back and I do my staff input to the forest supervisor. So now I step back and say, okay, I've got 2 appraisals here. And I have one, that's the agency-approved appraisal. I've got the other one that, yeah, I approved because it met the basic contract specs. Sometimes, even though it meets basic contract specs, is the credibility real high? No, because they missed a whole bunch of market stuff, even though I've tried to say you need to look at this stuff, and they'll just, no. Or there may be other reasons, or I may just say, you know, this one was pretty good. This appraiser found some stuff, you know, our guy missed, or found some other stuff. So I am like a little bird in her ear saying, you know what, I think you should go and base their fee on the second appraisal, and then she can take my advice and use it or not. I have never dug in my heels and said that you had to stick with the agency-approved appraisal. I have told her that even though I may disagree with some of the results of the second appraisal, because I don't think that they were all encompassing, that their credibility wasn't quite as high as ours, that there was still some credibility to it. They still brought forward some things that ours missed. So I may just say, why don't you give each report equal credibility, okay? Equal credibility. It's not arbitrary, it's just like you're giving them each equal credibility and come with your fee. And for purposes of math and saving time, that's splitting the difference, okay? That's not what you're gonna hear from me, but that's the bottom line what the math says. And so she may come in and do that as well. Her decision space is locked in between the two appraisal reports, okay? So please don't ask, well, you can ask her, but I would recommend asking her to come in anything lower than that because she doesn't have the authority of any other decision space, okay? So once she makes that final decision on your fee, depending on timing, okay? If it's before you would normally get your bill, you will get a decision letter from us saying, from Nancy saying, I have made my decision based on your second appraisal you submitted, your fee is going to be X. You are given immediate appeal rights. This will go into effect whenever your next billing cycle is, okay? Sometimes the time is worked out, we have sent these out at the same time as the billings have gone out just because the timing has matched up, all right? So what I'm saying is if you're still unhappy with Nancy's decision, you still have the right to file an administrative appeal on this. But please keep in mind, Nancy's decision space is still between here and there. If you're going to appeal this, it's got to be based on some facts or else it will be dismissed or dismissed in our response to you. You just can't say I don't like it. I don't like CUPA. I don't like the 5%. I don't like this whole gig. I want to hold out till CFA passes, okay? It's got to be based on factual stuff. And if you did not go through the process of going through a second appraisal, that probably diminishes any better appeal standing that you have. Okay, so I just want to kind of lay the groundwork for that. But it is a process. It has worked. We've gone through, I'm not going to say a lot of second appraisals. I mean, a good share, maybe 20%, I guess, when I look at the whole 550 or so lots that we have out there. Probably about 20-25% have gone through the second appraisal process in this region, somewhere in there. So.
And what was the results overall?
Overall, they went down. I didn't see any if they got up. They would never be turned into me. We have some, we had a lot of second appraisal requests that never followed through with getting a second appraisal report. Could be for a couple reasons. One, they just didn't want to pony up the money to pay for a report, or two, they went to a couple of appraisers and the appraiser says, you know what, I'm probably not going to come in that much different. We've had the ones lately that have come in, there have been less than a 5% difference in our value and the second appraisal value. So when you look at the ones I've gotten recently, you know, is it going to take them a long time of that, you know, $100 that they've saved every year on their fee to pay off the appraisal report? Yeah. You may want to get second appraisal reports for potential CFA benefits if CFA passes, because how I understand it is that CFA will use the second appraisal report in determining their values for your ranking in your specific tier. Whether or not the Forest Service went with that second appraisal or not, I believe they will be used, unless they were completely disapproved.
But these fees that you've imposed on us, even if CFA passes and comes through, they're not going to change, right? I mean, you're going to charge us.
No, they would change.
They would
When
change
CFA.
without an appraisal, or how?
No, CFA is based on all the first round CUFA appraisals being completed and second appraisal process is completed before, let's say, just say, and I'm going to go off just a little bit on CFA because I don't want to really comment, it's hard for me to comment on a law that hasn't passed yet, so this is what's been proposed. Okay, so CFA is based on their tier structure and the percentage of permit holders or lots that would be put in a specific fee tier, correct me if I'm wrong, it's based on all the first and the second appraisals being done. There's a factor that's applied to those numbers that kind of brings everybody up to the same level, because we have appraisals now that are going to be from 2006 to 2012, okay, in values. So they want to bring everybody up to a level, and that's a factor that's going to be applied. So once they're all factored, that means some will come down, some may go up, okay, to level everybody off. Then they'll look at percentages of where your fees are, and then that determines what tier that you are put in. Is it 10 tiers now? 11 tiers? 11 tiers now.
So it's a whole new process then it
It's
just
an
goes
absolutely
through.
whole new process.
What is CFA?
Cabin Fee Act.
Our only hope,
Yeah,
our only hope, you guys.
So as I hear you, Kim, you're saying there's going to be adjustment because the land value from 2006 to 2010 is different?
Yeah, well, exactly on some of them, because those ones that were done in 2006 were early on when the market was still probably at its peak, okay? Before it started to come down some. So we have some that are based at 2006, 2007 even, because it's kind of easy doing a retrospective appraisal to look back and get that data that's already set in place. There's no guessing, there's this, there's that, than it is when you're doing it on the spot, because you're based on data that's maybe just happening, or if you go too far back, you've got to interpret what's going to happen.
You're
But
saying
yes.
there's probably adjustment because the 2007 prices are different than the 2009 prices?
It could be, yes. Yes, exactly. That was the whole reason for the leveling. Whether whether some of you guys is all permit holders nationwide, okay? You know, whether that's a level a little bit or a lot of it, they just needed to use the same factor to apply it nationwide, okay? And that was their way of doing the specific Wells Fargo factor that they're using, all right?
What is the protocol for the appraisal?
Who writes the protocol?
Yes.
Well, I didn't write the protocol. I give the contract specifications, the instructions. They are nation.
By the district?
No.
By the Congress?
No, they were written by the Forest Service as part of the rules promulgated from CUFA that went out to public comment.
Okay, but after Congress passed the law, who wrote the protocol for these gentlemen around the United States to do the appraisal?
The Forest Service did
The Forest Service where?
in Washington, D.C.
And, okay, and who will be in charge of it?
Well, it was kind of a group effort between the appraisal staff and the special uses administrative staff.
There's no give and take here, it's just a one deal.
Well,
It's a order.
no,
It has nothing to do with me negotiating.
No, CUFA was very specific, and it said how we were to appraise and come up with those instructions. We just didn't grab it from the air. We also took those instructions, and if you look on one of the handout, ran them through the Appraisal Foundation, okay? Which is an independent appraisal board, under which all nationwide licensing and everything else goes through. So we wanted an independent look to make sure that we promulgated what was in CUFA correctly into contract specs. Those contract specs were also made part of the Federal Register notice that went out to every single one of you at the time for to receive comment. And so they've been vetted. It wasn't just something that the Forest Service did in the corner and we were going to hide it from everybody and then.
I'd like to interject just a bit. First, I want to make sure that since we're robustly entering into Q&A, Kim, have you finished your presentation? Okay. I just wanted to make clear on that. And then, you know, When you are working, I'm going to jump up here so I can see people. When you're working in the federal sector, we are working on the basis of national direction as described by Congress. And when we, the measure for us is, are we meeting congressional intent? So when a law is passed and we are expected to meet congressional intent, the law that is handed down to an agency is then promulgated through regulation. That regulation cannot take effect until it's gone through a public process, which is what the Federal Register is all about. That's a document that publishes all federal agencies' intent of developing regulation and putting that into the public process for comment. This all occurred years ago. CUFA was passed in 2000. It took our agency a couple of years to go through that public process. It was published in the Federal Register, and that happens with every single law of the land. And the laws that affect land management agencies would be about 2 of those binders stacked on top of each other. So we go through this public process fairly readily. And the reason I think it's worth noting, and I appreciate the gentleman bringing this up, because if CFA comes along, the Cabin Fee Act, I would bet you dimes to donuts that a few years after that is implemented, again promulgated through regulation, through the Federal Register, through the public comment process, we will still have meetings like this. There will still be people who are unhappy with fees. That's sort of the nature of it. But I do want folks to understand that what we're here to do today is help folks understand all the ins and outs of this process, because it is complex. And it does take specialists at all levels of our agency to do that interpretation of the regulation and create from that policy that is standardized. We can't treat anyone in our tracts any different than tracts in Colorado, tracts in Wisconsin, wherever the rec residences happen to reside. We as a federal agency have that obligation to the public to treat people equally. And so that's just part of the background, that this is very complex. Up until moments ago, I did not know that I will have this latitude between appraiser 1 and appraisal 2 to identify anything. But the fact is, the appraisal standing alone doesn't set fees. The appraisal informs our process that then we have that obligation to set fees. So if a second appraisal comes in, we will then evaluate that, and from that make that determination if an adjustment needs to be made. So I better understand that, and I appreciate that we got that far into the program to understand. And I also heard that there are ways, there are mechanisms to bring factual information forward if you feel that the appraisal done for the, you called it the 3 standard lots or whatever, when that appraisal is done, if there is factual information that for whatever reason was not considered, there's a mechanism to provide that. There's another mechanism that says you can produce a second appraisal at your expense. There's another mechanism that says you can appeal whatever the determination is administratively. So there are 3 ways in which, had you not been involved during the promulgation process, we're not here to debate the Federal Register or the policy. It's been set for years. But there are ways that you can bring to our attention other concerns, other potential discrepancies for consideration. So I don't want to lose that. There are those outlets for you if you feel like there is more information that we need to be apprised of.
On the subject of everybody being treated fairly, I noticed some of the data that's been assembled so far, there seem to be groupings of appraisal values. The lowest value is 50,000. I think the highest is 150 or something, and there are groups inside that. If a second appraisal has an effect on a particular grouping. In other words, because we're a limited number of comparables, if another appraiser says, well, I don't think 50,000 was the appropriate value on that, will that affect everybody in the $50,000 group, or do you have to go submit your second appraisal for each group?
It would, you have a second appraisal done for a specific typical lot.
And it won't affect any other typical lot
Well,
appraised at
typical
the same
lot in
level?
another tract that just happened to be at the $50,000 mark as well. So, because each attribute and things are just different in each, that's why we had typical lots and per tract. So.
Kim, another question, maybe related. I was under the impression that if you wanted to make an appeal, you had to get a majority of the people in your typical lot group to go in along with you.
Okay, no, that was pre-CUFA implementation, where it was part of the CUFA implementation. If you were dealing with your appraisals that were done in the late 90s or early 2000s, that if you wish to get a second appraisal done to have it, see if it met the new CUFA specs, you had to have the majority take place in that process. We are done. That was only a window of 2007, I believe, to no.
It's
done. It's gone. You had it from, I think, 2007 to 2009 to do that.
And one other quick question. If you go into a second appraisal, is that appraisal going to be made only on sales up to August 2010 that cannot take into account sales after that date?
I have let on second appraisals have a couple sales that went past that date of value if it was for a specific reason. It may have been, it was a recent enough sale, it verified or helped support where the appraiser was coming in at. It usually wasn't used as one of the main comparable sales per se that they hung his hat on. It was mainly used as a support mechanism. And like I said, if the appraiser truly explains it, it's been on the market, blah, blah, blah. There is a specific sale that I've let the appraiser use in these last couple rounds of second appraisals that's past the date of value. It helped support where they were coming in at. But I better not see all of the sales past the date of value. I mean, that's just not going to cut it. So, so for the most part, it's up into that date of value.
So I had a question, if you could clarify for me. If you want to challenge the appraisal, rather than, I mean, I know we have the opportunity to get a second appraisal, but we want to challenge the current appraisal. I'm not clear on what that process is.
Sure. If you want to challenge it, I would recommend, it's easier for me to respond and stuff in writing, and I don't want to discourage you from you guys calling me and asking me questions and stuff, but I would prefer that you to put it in writing, whether that's be a formal letter in the form of an email or something that just says, look, I've got these concerns. I don't think, whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. The appraiser didn't take into account blah, blah, blah. So that way I can either explain it, or maybe you brought something to my attention that I missed. I may go back to Lance to help either fully explain it, or maybe he may say, good point there. But
that would be in place of the factual information.
Correct.
It's not a paved road, it's a dirt road kind of.
Well, it could be, or that you're just like, I don't understand how we came up with this, well, he's gonna go into, this ranking system. I don't understand how we came in with a blended, rate as a check to his bracketing method, or I disagree with such and such. And then if you have some pertinent questions, I should be able to answer them.
So then if there's a question about, so say for example, in our lot specifically, the question I have is, we have a riverfront lot in Rainbow Tract. And one of the comparables, which to me was well outside the realm, was a comparable for a $340,000 lot with $100,000 lot with lake views. So to me, that's just a very basic question I have, is how can that possibly be even within the realm of consideration? So I'm not even sure. And then, so if we ask that question, we put it in writing, then what happens? I mean, what's the process
I will answer that question, and that will be something that I'll have to work out with the forest if they want me to answer that back through the forest supervisor, and then you get an official response from the forest, or if they want me to handle that response from the regional appraiser back to a permit holder, that I will answer that question. If for some reason that question results in a change of something, then I will let you know that too, and I'll go through that amendment process.
What's the way to, I mean, because obviously the results I would like to see is that then, you throw that one out and do something more reasonable. The result I'd like to see is that obviously that one gets thrown out. What does that, I mean, how do you get to that point? I mean, it sounds like you make a decision, but where the end result I'd like to see happen is that it can't be thrown out and appraisal be redone.
Right, well, and it may not come to that decision. I may have, and the appraiser may have a good reason as to why he had those sales, why there wasn't any other sales available. Like I said, I don't make up the data, it's just out there. I can't make up sales that don't occur. Or it may just say, look, I considered all that stuff, and that's why your lot came valued at X dollars and not $350,000.
Right.
Okay, that those things, and so those are some of the responses I may say, I don't know.
So then, but then I guess what I'm asking for is a process question, is that, so if you come up with, the justification for why that was used, is there an appeal? Is there a process for me to appeal that? Not so that I have to go get my own appraisal at my own expense, but that you guys go relook at it.
No, we will relook at it I take every comment or question that I get, I do take it seriously, I do take the time, and I do respond back to you guys. It's just easier for me when I get it in writing than to try to remember it from an angry phone call I may get to write it down.
I won't mean it.
I know. It's just hard for me to track because I have 6,000 of you in the region, so it's easier
I guess
for me
I'm
to
just
get it and read.
trying to find the process by which I can hopefully get to what I'd like to see, and that is to have that relooked at.
Okay.
What's the steps I need to take?
Okay, for one, write what you think is the problem or the issue. I will respond back to it. If you don't like my response and offer any further evidence, if you say you don't like that sale, because I don't think it's fair, then I'm going to say, okay, could you help me find market evidence of other sales that are out there? I would gladly take that into consideration, but there might be a point that we agree to disagree. Okay, and at that point, then you should follow through and get your second appraisal. We may come to that.
How do we get in touch with you? What's your email address?
On the back of the green sheet. On the back of the green sheet.
Sorry, I'm
Email
very
and phone numbers
sorry.
on the back side, so you can
Sorry,
get me.
sorry, got it.
I'm going to try and make it efficient since I'm right next door. So a couple process questions. Number one, how do we get the packet most efficiently that was provided by Forest Service to Mr. Dore so we can do the fact checking? So that's question number one. Question number two is, can we get a copy of Mr. Dore's notes, whatever notes he may have of his comparable analysis and whatever adjustments that he made based on his analysis of the comps, so that we have complete information without doing a FOIA request, or do we have to do a FOIA request?
Okay, so when you request, did you ask for a second, did you ask for a copy of the appraisal?
Have not yet.
Okay, so you need to ask that from the forest.
Well, wait, no, I do have a copy of the appraisal. I do have that.
Okay, so you have a copy of the whole report except for the other tract valuation stuff,
Right.
which technically you're not entitled to unless you do a FOIA request. So the appraisal are these three binders, and probably 75% of it is the individual tract valuation. So you've got the before stuff, you've got the reconciliation summary stuff, and you've got all the addenda stuff. And and if you have it, then you contact the forest, and you ask for that information.
What's missing, sir?
The addenda, you said you couldn't send me any more of the addenda.
Well, we must have, there's something missing. We can
We
send
don't
out,
we don't even have the title page for the appraisal.
we can send out everything except for what Tim has responded to.
So we will do that. So in that addenda stuff, there will be all of Lance's valuation stuff and a copy again of the contract specs. Those were his instructions from me to do the assignment. Are you entitled to his personal working files? No, you are not, because you're not the client. Okay?
Well, you're saying that you...
Because everything...
That's not available under a FOIA request?
No. So everything to meet the definition of an appraisal done under the Uniform Appraisal Standards of Federal Land Acquisition is considered, even if the appraiser calls it a summary, if it met the definition of that type of report Everything is in the appraisal that you need to reach that value conclusion, okay?
Okay, but where exactly is the transmittal piece that has the inventory, the tracked inventory?
It's in the addenda.
It's in the addenda? Oh, got it.
Hey, Kim, I have a couple questions for you over here.
Oh.
First off, in regards to the addendum, I notice it does not list addresses for the comparable properties. How do we actually get addresses to check and see whether or not they are actually comparable
Okay,
to
that
our
part
property?
you're looking at is not the addenda portion. So the addenda portion in the report is actually a comparable sales sheet
Okay.
and a map, and it's got everything in there that can get you to the piece of property. I can tell by what you're looking at, you're not looking at.
Okay, I'll get with you afterwards
Okay.
then. Another question for you is that it makes a lot of references to the difference between residential and recreational property. In your understanding, what constitutes a residential property as opposed to a recreational property?
Do I answer that or can you answer that? Okay, you gotta get it depends, okay? So in some instances, on some sales, it could be termed interchangeable, depending on where those sales came from, okay, the area, I should say. What Lance was tasked to do is to find those more in remote areas that people typically would use them as a recreation, second home type of lot to build that kind of cabin. Now, in some of those areas, if they put the right kind of structure on there, if they put the right kind of infrastructure in, the right kind of water system, and they were close enough possibly to a paved road, could they possibly use that year-round? Possibly, maybe. But the intent is to use it from those areas that, for the most part, those vacant lots were purchased for a second home or a recreation type use.
Okay, our cabin's a boat-in cabin and only has about 4.5 months of access during the year. And it's on a Forest Service controlled road. However, going through all these comparables, it's just listing out residential properties. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, as an appraiser, what do you refer to, whether it be Code of Federal Regulations, internal policy, what is the actual definition of residential versus a recreational property?
Okay, a recreational property is a property you can build depends what part of recreation. Do you want it just for camping, for
I guess what I'm
hunting,
asking is, where is it cited?
Okay, it's cited in, I believe there's definitions in CUPA of
Okay.
what a recreation residence is and how it should be considered. Now, when he is describing whether it's residential or recreation, my part as a reviewer is to go and look at those comparable sales. Now, if I'm going somewhere on a 5-mile dirt road that has no chance of being plowed, it's seasonal access, and there's no utilities brought out there to the site, I'm kind of thinking he hit it on the mark, okay? Whether he labeled it residential or recreational, okay?
I think that's part of the problem, is that we can have varying definitions of what's considered residential versus
Well, that's
recreational.
why you've got to go out and look at the lots that were actually used, and there's pictures of them in there. So you can see that, just like interpretations of Lakeview, Lakefront, all those kinds of things. It gets down to some of it, not quite all of it, some of it gets down to semantics and interpretation. So if you go out there and look at those comparables, okay, I get why he used it. I may not like it at the end of the day, but I can understand why he used these lots because they are pretty similar.
But
Yeah.
being a licensed appraiser, as you are, I mean, you cannot be basing this solely on individual interpretation of the appraiser. There has to be some sort of underlying supporting
Yeah,
document,
me going out
policy
there and
document.
physically looking at those lots to see what he used as compared.
But what
to
is it
else.
that you are applying that with, in terms of your
My
understanding
professional
of?
judgment that his
I think what you're missing here is what is it that defines residential versus recreational? Is it a policy document? Is it written
It's
somewhere?
not a policy document.
Okay.
Okay, it's not a policy document.
So we're leaving it up to your own individual interpretation.
Well, no,
what's a recreational.
recreation residence is defined by the Forest Service is a lot that can be used, and it can be used unless you have specific restrictions that you can't go in there. If you choose not to go in there, or you choose because you're not able to hike in, you can actually use that all year round. You just have to
We're not
have,
able to, but all the comparables
Okay.
are based on the
you just
residential.
have to have a primary place of residency somewhere else, okay?
To change the subject, I have another question for you as well too. How important is risk in conducting the appraisals? I know you make mention of whether or not the property falls under a FEMA flood map, seismic hazards. In particular, do you look at avalanche hazards as part of the appraisal process at all?
Possibly. It depends. It
Now-
depends. Usually, if we can find sales that are in a similar mountain area that still has those same risks, okay? Whether it be fire, whether it be flood, or, you know, it takes a while for any type of law enforcement to get there, because usually those that are in private land have those same remote private properties, have those same similar type of situations going on.
And the reason why I bring that up is looking through old appraisals dating back several decades. It was mentioned in every single one of those appraisals, the risk of avalanche to our particular lot. However, there was no mention of it in this particular appraisal that was issued. Would that have a potential impact in revaluing the property?
It may not, just because the appraiser didn't feel that that risk was being reflected back in the market participants. And that's kind of segues into something else.
Why don't we limit this to one question per person? A lot of
Okay,
people want to
all right,
speak
I want
up
to talk
here.
about market participants, because you folks as permit holders have a very distinct opinion about your lot, and rightfully so, okay? The appraiser's job is to see how your positive and negative attributes are reflected into the private marketplace. You may think that your lot is worthless because blah, 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 okay? But when the public and the public market is out there looking at it, they don't see those same flaws. They may like being a little bit more remote, okay? They may enjoy having a boat-in lot, okay? They may enjoy what other things, or maybe only having access 3 or 4 months a year, knowing that they're close to a wilderness area, getting that little slice of heaven for 3 months out of the year, okay? So we have to look, and that's what the appraiser opinion is based on, is what the market participants think. Sure, we get your input on the positives and negatives, and usually it's all the negatives, about your particular lots, but it's reflected back in the market. Okay, and with the that's why some appraisals have changed from the last go-around. Market participants have changed. What people are looking for in lots have changed a little bit over time. What they're willing to deal with, what they want to get away from. Okay, they want to get away from some of those more urban-type influences, or having everything ready to go at Wi-Fi and all that stuff. So things have changed.
Well, are you saying that if there's a I can't find, the appraiser can't find a comparable that has an avalanche risk, therefore I won't take that into account in valuing the typical? That's what I heard you say, and that seems illogical.
No, I believe that there are those comps that were used that are in those same similar areas that have the same similar avalanche uses. Now, if avalanche is a big prevalent thing, and the cabins have been wiped out year after year because of avalanche danger, okay, then I think we've got a problem, or maybe we shouldn't have a cabin there to begin with. So there's some, I mean, almost anywhere close to those type of areas, and you can probably go around the basin and see where a lot of private lots or infrastructure is there that has avalanche, some avalanche.
What I'd like to do now, because we're cutting into lunch, and if we decide to continue, then we need to just decide we're going to continue. Otherwise, we can break here. It's 5 after 12 by my clock. You wanted 30-minute lunch. So if you all can be back here at 12:35, then we will pick this up. And again, if you want to leave questions on the flip chart over here, things that you might want to make sure we address, and maybe you don't want to bring them up personally, at least we'll have a copy of your concerns in writing, and then we can take it from there at 12:35.
Folks, part of the reason you were giving your Q&A is if you wanted to review that at lunch, that might answer a lot of your sort of systematic questions. Please take a peek at that. Thank you. We'll see you in half an hour.
Fun. Which track are you in?
Rainbow.
Where is that?
Right off 89 in Myers.
Are you on the river? Or?
Yeah, about, I don't know, 50 yards or so, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, according to them, it's so front.
I've requested for everything. So for my lot. It does seem that we did get a little gypped on.
Well, yeah, way off base.
Cuffa really screwed me. My place is built some bedrooms with a cabin next door, which ironically is one of the shit, really. But they're valuing the lot, and they can't take into consideration the fact that I can't build on it.
Yeah.
And basically don't have a kitchen. Nothing.
Well, they're supposed to be just valuing a lot with nothing on it. I mean, that's their hypothetical situation. My hypothetical situation is one yard in front of me. I got
we've got a lot of issues with it. It's hard for us to
on the
tell
market
what
for $23,000 less than what you
So that's what
that's interesting.
If you want to say that the market has gone up 30% since 2010, you know what? I have a real estate license and I have issues with that, and I'm going to let it go.
It's not clear to us.
You found any facts? That lot is on the market for $72,000 right now.
Now, what they'll get us in value, I don't know that, but yeah, we're combing through it. These characters back there are going through with a fine tooth comb.
Okay, great. Thank you. My lot is worth $95,000 in 2010. I can do that.
No rule.
Well, it sounds like you might possibly be able to get them to change something.
No, it sounds to me like shit. You jack shit about it.
You might not. So are you familiar with any appraisers out there?
Oh yeah, I know a few appraisers. I mean, there's 3 lots for sale on the built-up street directly in front of where I am. I mean, there's just
would you be able to maybe recommend a few names that aren't on the list, that you might be able to consider?
The problem is that most of the appraisers that work in that area, they don't want to do it. There's a lot of real estate.
Well, I'm sure that they might not, but,
And they have to be certified to do it. Thank you very much. They have to go through all the rigmarole to do it, and then there's no money in it for that. That's why these guys charge $4,000 or $5,000 to do it.
Yeah, what's the normal appraiser?
That's
25.
They can't get
they can't deal with it.
I'm in real estate. I've sold shit all over Silicon Valley, down in Santa Cruz County. Appraisers charge $250 to appraise. These guys charge $5,000 to appraise.
So, my point, do you have any names of anybody? Because if enough people go to them, it might be worth it for them to get set up.
Nobody up there will do it.
Maybe you should let us try and reach them anyway.
No, I can do that. I'll get up to date, but I know up there. I bring up the son and she thinks he's able to do it.
Well, I mean, if you just give me the contact of everybody, I don't even have to say you recommended or said her name. I can just say, hey, that you might be somebody that could help us out.
The agent tonight.
Okay.
Even with that there,
She's the appraisal agent?
no, she's a broker.
Oh.
That's her, she works up there, she knows that area. This guy, I don't know where the hell he's from, he doesn't know anything about Lake Tahoe.
So Trish Hall is she's a real estate broker up there? Okay.
Give you her email if you want. You can tell her, I mean, it doesn't matter. She knows her pretty well.
Anyway, Kathy, I need to get out. Yeah, I'll give you a call back.
Excuse me. Okay. Trish at trishhall.com. There you go. Trish, T-R-I, at trishhall.com.
How's it going? Greg Ellis from Echo Lake. This is Bob Lavelle. And I'm happy to give you my contact info. Definitely your comment of being so close to private.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Greg.
Greg?
Greg Galvin.
Greg Galvin. Thanks.
Take the right on 89, go up 2 streets, Corey, Wasabi, whichever one you want to turn in on. Go in one block, and it's a really long road, parallel that line. You see 2,000 to 5,000 square foot houses right there. They keep my people with the lots. Plus, there's 2 lots to see on right there. Still, nobody wants to buy it. So that tells you something about people wanting to buy it. Even